everyone, I'm Özge.
I'm Sena. Welcome to ACUPEP podcast series.
In this episode, you'll listen to an interview with Turgut Turunç, who is a maestro in the teacher training community. This episode is about error correction in communicative teaching. Dear Turgut Hocam, welcome to the second episode of our podcast series on error correction.
It is great honor of me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Özge Hoca is also here. Hi, Özge Hocam.
Hi, everybody. Hi, it's nice to see you, Hocam.
Thank you very much for inviting me to your event. It's always good to be part of it, an event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hocam.
Hocam, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Turgut Turunç. I'm affiliated with Altınbaş University currently, but I have a huge experience right in ELT, from kindergarten to higher education, from young children teaching to adult teaching. This includes also teacher training, as you're doing. I worked for publishing companies. One of them was Oxford University Press, and I was doing the same thing, in fact, right? When I heard your invitation, it made me very happy. Then I quickly, turned on my computer and I started to do some search, right? What I did is, I just looked some issues, read some articles, and Google search, and I learned a lot of things. Thank you very much for providing me with this opportunity. So here, this is not my first time, to be in this sort of ELT events, I'm used to, and this is one of them, but it really makes me excited, because I love these sort of events. Thank you.
Thank you, Hocam.
Welcome, Hocam.
Sena Hocam, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, sure.
Have you noticed my mistakes or error when I talk?
I haven't actually. Özge Hocam, did you?
Özge Hocam?
No, I was just focusing on your introduction. I didn't hear anything.
Yeah, as I remember, in my introduction, I started with present tense, and just introduced myself. There was no problems with that, I guess. I don't know, really. Later, I focused on your inviting myself, and I started with, when you invited me, I got very excited. I started with past tense, then I continued with present simple.
Oh, really?
And I said, I Google search, learn, and it makes me very excited. In terms of tense sequence, this was not proper, and it was a sort of error, but you didn't even notice this,
We didn't know.
Yeah, do you ever think, why didn't you interrupt and stop me and correct my mistake or error?
Perhaps that wasn't the focus.
Oh, right. Okay. So to start with, this could be a signal, to our listeners, to audience, We don't always focus on errors, We focus on some other things. For example, in this sense, you asked me a question, so I introduced myself to you, and your focus was the message that I conveyed, So it was not that important. You didn't even, stop me and correct me, but just we continued. And I did this intentionally,
Yeah.
So it could be a start, I guess, a warm-up activity maybe for the listeners, for the audience,
I'll start with the first question, Turgut Hocam.
Yes.
According to the research of Blair and Bromfitt, the emphasis of errors is doing exactly what the teachers want to avoid, with the fossilization of the errors. The reason is probably the fact that the attention is constantly drawn to those errors. Similarly, as Krashen and Terrell say, our view is that overt error correction of speech, even in the best of circumstances, is likely to have a negative effect on the students. On the students' willingness to try to express themselves. In the light of these expert opinions, Does error correction really do the opposite of what it intends to do by focusing on the error?
I believe to answer this question, we should maybe ask some more questions. What comes to my mind is these sort of things, and we can always find place, right, with these questions in literature, right, relevant literature. For example, one of them is, what type of an error is the error to be corrected? So how we decide on this? The second question could be, what's the source or reason for error or of error? Are you working on language systems? Language systems, I mean syntax, lexis, phonology, and functions? Or are we working on language skills, for example? Are we working on receptive skills? Are we working on productive skills? So are we focusing on more on productive skills than receptive skills? So we just develop our students' productivity. So there are some more questions, Hocam. Is our focus on accuracy or fluency? What are the expected outcomes? Are we focusing on perfectionism or intelligibility? Intelligibility, I mean, you don't focus on perfect and correct and accurate sentences. Your focus is on conveying messages, for example. But when compared, right, this to perfectionism, in perfectionism, you need to focus on correct pronunciation, correct words, and the other things. So do we know the answer to this question? What does English as a lingua franca mean to us? Who will correct whose errors? How and why? Is the teacher equipped with giving feedback and correcting errors? Are the learners trained to give and receive feedback? What will error correction result in? So these questions can be expanded, and maybe there might be some more questions. So to answer the question that you ask will depend on the answers given to my questions also. So they, Bromfit and the others, Blair and maybe Terrell, Krashen and Terrell, they just suggest error should or may be corrected depending on different circumstances. So if I say, yes, definitely true, right? We should correct all the time. Then the question is, under what circumstances is what I am telling could be said to be true? If I say no, the same question arose. So most of the time, depending on my observation, based on my observations I am talking, I regularly observe teachers in their classes when they teach, and I observe them to focus on correction very strictly, right? Even if their focus is not on accuracy, they still correct. So what is the influence and effect this correction on students? Do we know? Are we aware? But the belief is, right, if we correct immediately, it's good because we don't let these errors or mistakes to become fossilized. But not always, I guess. So sometimes, as in the questions, the case is in the opposite, right? Different opinions. You intend to correct or help students, scaffolding, let's say, but the result may not be this always. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hocam. So
Thank you, Hocam.
we don't have a definite answer.
We don't have a definite answer.
Right,
True.
that's right. To correct or not to correct? That's the question.
That lies the question. Yes, right.
Okay, Hocam.
Yes, Özge Hocam, the
So-
second one is yours.
Okay, Hocam, you mentioned about the appropriate circumstances. I mean, when to correct, how to correct. It all depends on the situation. Yeah, that's what we know, in fact. Thank you very much for the great explanation. But
Thank
let's
you.
say that we have these circumstances and we really want to correct something. And of course, there are some techniques which are the most popular ones, like metalinguistic explanation, repetition, recasting, delayed correction, peer correction, or elicitation, clarification request, echoing, etc., and etc. Lots of techniques to apply while doing error correction. I mean, in communicative teaching, Hocam, which ones are the most applicable ones, do you think?
Hocam, when you talk about communicative teaching, we need to remember maybe the three basic principles of communicative teaching, right? They are the communication principle, the task principle, and the meaningfulness principle. So when we talk about communicative teaching, right? So our focus is on communication. So there must be some information gap between the parties. So they ask and learn from each other. Then they just come up with more questions, right? So the goal there, the purpose is encourage students to communicate as much as possible in the learning setting. But also they do this within a framework of a task, right? Task could be, now look at this, the prompts, choose and ask your partner to learn about X, Y, Z, then report this to someone else. So the task should be meaningful to learners, right? Because mind is always questioning, why am I doing, what am I doing, right? So in this sense, so within a meaningful task, students are trying to communicate, convey messages from sender to receiver, from receiver to sender again, right? So in this sense, the focus usually is, right, help students to right, achieve a goal, right, communication in this sense. So within this framework, right, which one is better, right? So, for example, just look at metalinguistic explanations. Students are communicating, right, within a pair work or maybe group work. Teacher also prompting sometimes, right, so they encourage and scaffold. Then you start metalinguistic explanations, right, saying that this is something like this is something like that, using this meta language also. Present simple is something like this, passive constructions is built up like that. Don't you think this will lack the communication? I do, right? So we should not stop and interrupt learners in this sense, but we can scaffold, we can maybe prompt some, and we can maybe repeat the students' sentences so they become aware, right, of their errors if they can. But the suggestion is, do not intervene that much. Rather, just monitor your learners, take your notes, highlight some errors, common errors, and then when the task is over, achieved, maybe you can have a sort of feedback session. And in this feedback session, you may just explain things. You can use your meta language if you are very happy with that. But I'm not with that. In communicative approach, we don't interrupt students. So delayed correction may be relevant, right, in communicative teaching, communicative teaching. Peer correction also could be encouraged, but this is a matter of training your learners. Do they know how to? Are they guided enough before, after, during the tasks? Elicitation could be done right after the task is over, but during the task, I don't think it's very relevant. Maybe you can ask some clarification questions also. And echoing is good because as they speak and continue to convey their messages, they might hear the correct, right, version from the teacher or the other input providers, whatever it is. It could be a listening text, it could be a reading text, written or audio recorded. So my view on this, be patient, in communicative teaching, the goal is different. The goal is help students to achieve a task so through which they can communicate and also use the patterns and the lexical items, whatever learned so far. So why bother, right? And interrupt, right, immediately. So immediate correction is not my type. Metalinguistic explanation, I don't think it's relevant. Repetition could be if you're very careful in terms of intervening and interrupting the students' work. And also we can talk about delayed correction. Why not? It's a very good, right? So you keep a record of the errors and then you create a discussion. I'm okay with peer correction, but students should be trained. And also elicitation could be done before the task starts and after maybe. Echoing is good, right? You can echo your learner's errors with the correct version.
Hocam, I have a different question now. Should error correction in communicative teaching be limited to accuracy-based activities?
Accuracy-based activities, right? It depends on how accurate your accuracy-based activities. And in communicative teaching, there is a place, there is a room for accuracy-focused, accuracy-based activities. And what is the purpose of these accuracy-based activities? Imagine we are just helping students with some drilling activities, say back chain drill, right? So you ask your students to use the pattern, past form of the verbs correctly. So you create a sort of habit on your learner's side. You are drilling. There is this room, but the focus should not be on this. It could be a sort of a helper, right? Or prompter, reminder to your students. So in this sense, if your focus is on accuracy, hocam, right? So accuracy is correctness already, right? So you see your students, they're making some mistakes. Using one of the techniques we mentioned previously, you can maybe correct students' errors. I'm fine with this. But still, in communicative teaching, right, especially with the communicative tasks, right, please do not, right, be patient. But your question, accuracy-based activities. So where I correct, I don't correct with more communicative activities. If you just compare this, right, two, I would say, no, you can correct anytime. If you are aware of your purpose of correction, if you think that it's beneficial for your learners, it's not going to lack your students conveying messages or communication, you can also do it with more communicative activities, more fluency-based activities. But focus is on accuracy, and the activity itself is on accuracy-based activity. I don't think we should limit it, but we can. Thank you.
Another question here we have, hocam. What are some ways to overcome fossilized errors in communicative teaching?
Fossilized, right? Fossilized error. Fossilized error are the ones that the students are not aware, right? So they're doing it regularly, right? And they really don't know, right? They are doing an error, right? Or making a mistake, but the teacher is aware, right? So we should overcome this, right? First of all, shall we just quickly look at the source of these sort of errors, right? For example, when we just focus on this intelligibility issue, right? This is the conveying messages, we know, right? No problems if they make some mistakes or slips or whatever. But when we see that there are some fossilized errors, right? We know that student is repeatedly doing this, and we should stop that, right? We cannot let this something wrong should go, right? So one reason is that the student is more focusing on intelligibility, not perfectionism, conveying messages. Another reason could be that they're not aware, right? In this sense, right, if we just think about the students' intellectual level, right? So intellectual level, I mean, in their mother tongue, they have a different level, right? In the target language, they are limited to words, to patterns, to differences in both languages. So in interlanguage process, for example, when going from one language to the other, errors are inevitable, right? So what are some ways? First, we may attempt to understand, learn what the source is. Maybe he knows, she knows, right? This is not an error, but normal. Or maybe from their own culture, target language culture, suggest that mistake or error. So after understanding this, we may maybe individually, not overgeneralizing, right, talk to learners using some of the techniques. In this sense, direct explanations are better. This is my view. It's arguable. You don't have to agree or disagree. Why? Because I'm not saying immediate. I'm saying direct, right? You can give some explanations. You can ask your learners to compare it with the target language and the mother tongue, and then help learners without just making him feel bad in front of the others. If I were in this case and just learn that some students are using errors, right, repeatedly, and these are fossilized errors, I would just talk to them personally, in person, explaining the situation. Then they will become aware, and then maybe they can change in a while, right? Not immediately after you're told. Maybe we can remember Jeremy Harmer's, right, and the others are also talking about this, noticing, awareness raising activities, and then correction, change, right, cycle. We may help our learners to become aware, notice their errors. Then we may lead them or guide them to do some search, right? So they learn themselves, come to you, talk to them, and then correct. For example, I have this sort of experience. I was working with the British Council though that time, right, years ago, and I was the panelist, one of the panelists who are just helping native speaker teachers, foreigners, right, foreign teachers, to adapt themselves in Turkish situations. There, I was using some sentences and explaining the wearing style and the traditions or whatever. And somebody among the audience just repeated my sentence. And I was using drive, the word drive, and the third past participle form of the verb. And I used, I have driven, blah, blah, blah. And she just echoed, right, or repeated my sentence with driven. And I became aware. That was the noticing part, right? And then after the panel, right, I just searched, looked up in the dictionary and see, right, that this is not a problem because American would use driven, right? Not the British, right? But I became afraid, right? Because it was an error before an audience or something. I was under the influence of one of my professors when I was at university, and he studied, he worked in the United States, right? And he taught like this. He didn't even mention about this, but I adopted that one. So by myself, right, I became aware, noticed, and then awareness raising activity, looking up it in the dictionary. Then I saw that it's not an error, but I don't use driven no more, right? I use driven, right? So can we just help learners in this sense, for example? I don't know. There are ways, millions of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, fossilized errors are fossilized errors, but as an English instructor, I prefer teaching English to completely zero beginners because they don't have fossilized errors.
Yeah.
It's difficult to change those habits, you know. Thank
And
you for the answer.
the term for that is false beginners. False beginners, right? Learn something wrong, right?
Yes,
Then it's not easy to correct them, right? Because
unfortunately. Thank you, Hocam.
Thank you, Hocam. Okay, so let's
Thank
continue
you.
with the next question.
Uh-huh.
Should we be investigating student preference for error correction? If so, what are some ways of doing this?
This is a very interesting question because the answer to this question is it's a matter of your training your learners, right? Sometimes EFL, ESL teachers purely focus on what to teach, what to learn, right? So they have their agenda, they have their pacing plans, right? Their course books or whatever. They focus on the language only, right? So, but in order to create a very effective rapport, right, with the students, interaction with the students, you should work on the students. I remember David Marsh, right, and I asked this question to him, right, what's the difference what you're doing in Finland and us doing in Turkey? Because PISA results have shown, right, our students, our individuals are very low. He thought, I don't know your system, but most probably it's you are working on the systems, but we are working on individuals, right? So my motto in this sense, without reaching your learners individually in the teaching and learning process, you may not be effective, right? So in this sense, you are just questioning this one, right? So error correction, student preference, right? Should we give, right? Can they work? The question comes then, are they independent learners, for example? Do they take risks? Do they question their learning process? Do they really want help from others? Right? Are they capable of using other resources? So in this sense, maybe when you start the class, right, your lessons, just talk about this, help them know, right? Get them to know these sort of things and develop them, right? Training slowly and gradually. If you have done this, then you can leave this, right? Students' hands. They can do it. But if they don't ask these sort of questions, I observe some students, they will ask and wait for the teacher, just right, correct themselves and learn for themselves, right? No, it's impossible. So as a teacher, as an experienced teacher, right, I could say, please start with knowing your learners and then learn about them. Be aware of their educational background and cultural or economical, whatever it is. Then talk about yours, help them scaffolding, right, change. Then you can just leave it to the student's preference. Thank you.
Thank you, Hocam. Özge Hocam, next question is yours. Next two.
All right, Hocam, thank you very much. I'm sure this interview will be a great guide for the professionals in ELT. What encourages teachers to do error correction on the spot?
Yeah, I can only base this question on my experience when I observe teachers, right? So I can learn. I've also witnessed and observed them, right, when they do error correction, immediate or after, or on the spot or whatever. So I think this is because due to the teacher's beliefs, right? So imagine that an EFL instructor is newly graduated and just analyze their education background. So what happened to them at university, right? So at university, they were just focusing on the language from a different perspective, from an expert perspective. So they were forced, right, to use the language correctly, separately working on reading, separately working on speaking, grammar, contrastive grammar, etc., and etc., right? So teacher believes that I learned this way, so I teach similarly. So in this sense, on-the-spot correction was important to them, right? When they were learning, when they were in the process of interlanguage. But when you're teaching, it's a different story, right? So the question says, right? So do we really need to correct, right? On the spot, right? Or something as teachers? Yeah, beliefs force us. So if you just maybe train yourself, develop yourself, right? I'm not the same Turgut when I started teaching as now, right? Because I learned a lot, experience, your more education, further education, and also your courses, professional development, events, etc., and etc. Then you start looking at the things from various perspectives. In this sense, yeah, if the teacher, for example, if they are working on accuracy, it's acceptable, right? Because the purpose is to help lower level learners, right, to come up with accurate sentences. Then you can correct, of course, gently, right, without not insulting the learners, right? But if not, why bother? I don't know, right? Also, I may have answered the questions with the same answer, the other questions: intelligibility versus perfectionism. Purpose, perfectionism. Work on it, right? Purpose, conveying messages and developing learners' skills, right? Productive skills. Forget about it. Maybe later. So I guess it's the teacher, right? We should work on the teachers, right? Teachers, please, right? More.
Yeah, when I was a newbie, I had a feeling that I had to control everything, even the smallest mistakes that my students made. I mean, I had to correct all the time. In fact, but later on, as you said, I changed everything.
Yeah, from my observations, let me just tell you an anecdote, right? Teachers are just doing this listen and decide true, false activities, right? Then they say, please correct the false ones, right? Sentences. And they ask students, right, to work in pairs, right? So they compare their answers. Then teacher starts eliciting, right, from the students. After that, they start to slideshow the answer key and shows the answer key one by one. I say, why, right? Because my answer is simple. Most of the teachers are control freak, right? So if they make a mistake, then language is over. No, right? There are times, right? There are some other times that they can correct. Anyways, yeah, teachers' beliefs is important, I guess.
Should we impose on students the idea that English has to be used error-free?
Hocam, not fully, I guess, right? So, yeah, it depends on the end product, right? So what is our purpose, right, with the task, right? What are the students working on? Are they working on accuracy or are they working on fluency, right? So which skill are we developing, improving, right? So in what ways we are helping our students? So in this sense, students may not know, right, the errors. It could be fossilized or sleeps or any types, right? So we should monitor and observe, right? If we just fully release this, right, this is an error-free, right, English, right, then we contradict with the idea of intelligibility, right? And lingua franca. I've been to, I know that you have been to different countries, and I've been to Oxford, for example. In Oxford, there are some neighborhoods, right, Pakistani people live there, right? The Indian people live some other parts, right? So Oxford is not the Oxford that we imagine, right? Years ago, I read a book, right? It was a research, in fact. I borrowed the book from the British Council Library, and the title was Different Accents and Dialects in London. And the results have shown, right, there are different grammars in London. There are different vocabulary, lexis in London. Accent, pronunciations, different. So we should not leave it to the student's hand, because we cannot continue with error-free ideal world. No, we should monitor, observe, but we should also, as we discussed in the previous questions, help learners, right, to do this. My answer to this question is simply no, hocam, right? The first part of the question, how should we correct errors as teachers? And there is not exact recipe for this, right? It depends on the circumstance. The circumstances theory suggests, right? So under what circumstances you should do X or Y or Z, right? It's the owner's decision. So there are ways of correcting students. My suggestion to be as gentle as possible, right? Because they're in the learning process and the students are under the pressure of making mistakes, errors, especially young learners or university students, young adults, not adults, right? Teenagers, not exactly. They're in between. So they have this boyfriend, girlfriend issues, right? They could be under the pressure of their families, parents, right? And also they are thinking about their faculties, right? Also, there are some foreigner students these days at universities. So they're just living in a different community, a country. So culturally they are in shock, etc. and etc. So in this sense, my suggestion is the gentle correction, right? Gentle correction suggests not to correct directly, because there is this risk of insulting learners. Rather, you just focus on the source of the error, right? What is the cause? What's the reason, right? So you understand, asking some gentle questions to students and they answer, and then you can softly correct, right? It could be repeating sentences or echoing sentences, or maybe direct explanations, I don't know. If you just created this atmosphere, right, to correct, then it's okay. The second part of the question, hocam, right, should we leave the students to do their own devices, or should we, right, do this, right? Best suggestion is leave it to the learner's hands. But to do so, you need to have independent learners, right? And this brings us to learner autonomy, right? Learner autonomy writes about, right, risk takers, initiators, right, or surger, right, etc. and etc. Are our learners like that? I don't really think, right? So in Turkey, right, students to just enter university entrance examination, they focus on multiple choice questions. Other countries, right, especially Middle Eastern countries, they have different problems, right? They have literacy problems, right, in terms of writing and the others. So try to understand and just keep your path, right, in a similar level, and then help them. After guiding them for a couple of times, as a teacher, leave it to learners' hands, because it's their responsibility. And we know that research has shown this, right? If you just work on declarative memory, everybody learns, right? And they store it to the short-term memory. But if you help them with the processing memory, when they operate this one, they work on things, they have some problems, they try to solve problems, they notice, they become aware, they solve their problems, get help from others, then they operate their processing memory. This means that it's going to go to the long-term memory. Long-term memory is good, right? We still remember times from when we were students, right? So it's good, right? Effective and influence. My side, right? My point, my view is please leave this to students' hands, because it's their own responsibility. Please do not just leave. Help them, guide them, train them, let them experiment, right? Try, and then it's their responsibility in university setting. This will happen anyways when they go to their faculties in EMI setting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you hocam.
Thank you.
Özge
It's
hocam.
like tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. Isn't it hocam?
Definitely, hocam. This Chinese word, right? So definitely, because it should be them, right, to take their own initiative, responsibility. I know it's not easy. Work on it, right? You can do it, right? So create a rapport, interact with the students properly, help them, and tell them, I'm not your walking dictionary, right? I'm not your resource all the time. There are some other resources. Go and search. Come to me with the results, we can say.
In fact, hocam, again, you a little bit mentioned about the sources of the errors. But there is a question here again. Is it important to investigate what leads students to make errors rather than focusing on the error themselves?
Hocam, we briefly talked about this,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely we should go to the source of the error, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you just simply leave it, right, it's seeing that this is the process of learning, right? So it's simple, right? No, we should understand, right? What's the source? What's the reason? Also, what's the end product, right? What's the outcome? So then we may decide, and saying that, right, for example, are we just looking at the slips, right? It's an error type, right, as you know, right? Slips may not be very important because students know, right, what it is, but when talking, maybe we are doing a lot of mistakes and errors now when we're talking. Who bothers, right? And why bothers, right? But because we're focusing on our message here, right? So in this sense, slips may not be very serious. Why not working on that? But if you notice, and students, right, are used to receiving feedback from the teachers, you can, right? So I guess we should, right, definitely, right, focus on the reasons, focus on the error, right? Maybe yes, if it's a sort of fossilized error, for example, then why not working on it? Because we want our students to do this mistake or error repeatedly. So first part is with me. Second part is depending on the situation.
Great, hocam. Thank you. So we should decide when to correct, how to correct, where to correct. So they're all answered here.
Multitasking.
Multitasking, right?
Yeah, it's all the literature, right, and the studies conducted so far on error correction suggest that, right. Please focus on the source of the error, reasons, then type of the error. Is it systematically done errors, or it sleeps, or whatever? Identify it, act accordingly. This is the suggestion.
Okay, hocam, thank you. Another question we have. When a student makes an error, does it necessarily show that they are in the process of learning, or does it really show progress?
Yeah, critical question. Right. This takes me to the discussion, this interlanguage process, right? Interlanguage process means, right, from one language, it's a journey from the mother tongue, language one, to the target language, right? So when going along this journey, right, students are under the influence of their mother tongue, right? So they have learned fine, so they are literate enough, right? They are mature enough to think and express opinions. So when they start the language, especially with the lower levels, or maybe native-like speakers like us here, right? We are under the influence of our mother tongue, idiomatically, culturally, etc., and etc. Students, when learning, teachers ask them to produce something, right? Orally or in the written form, right? So they quickly think, right, as they think in their mother tongue, and they attempt to express themselves accordingly. So even if they don't know how to build up that sentence pattern, they attempt to use it. Because in the mother tongue L1, they do it. So naturally, they do some mistakes and errors, right? So in this sense, it is quite normal in this process, right? It is a result of a process, right? Because they should be just thinking themselves from that level, B2 level, C1 level in the mother tongue, to lower it to A2, to B1, and etc. and etc. Starting from B1 to C, right, levels, it is a plateau, right? There is a plateau effect there. There is a lot to learn. There is a lot to learn. So naturally, they make an error, right? So I guess it shows, it necessarily shows, right? They're in the process of learning. And this also shows progress if scaffolded well by the teacher, right? So scaffolding means, you know, right? You just help learners, right? They can make mistakes, but they are just sure that teacher is there. They will help them, right? So yes, Hocam, yes, it shows progress.
Okay, thank you, Hocam. Now this
You're welcome.
12th question is the most important question to me. I really want to get your answer on this. As a writing teacher myself, I really struggle with giving feedback to my A1 and A2 level students' essays. I have a feeling that I need to provide correction to every single error, be it structure, lexis, syntax, mechanics, content, organization, etc. But this is very demanding on the teacher's side. And in the end, I don't even know if my feedback is useful. Is there a way to decrease the load of giving this much feedback? Or is there a way to make sure that our feedback achieves what it's supposed to do?
There must be, right? Because the belief is, are there problems? There are also solutions, right, with them, along with them, right? Hocam, writing, right? I just saw that this question comes from Sena Hoca, right? Because as a writing teacher myself, she says, so she's suffering from this illness, right? Let's say, and this problem. Yeah, writing, right. What are we asking our students to do? We're asking our students to show, right, to just maybe prove, right, they can use the language effectively to express their opinions, ideas in written form, right? So what are the ways? The ways is you're going to use language codes, right? In English, for example, this is coffee cup, but in Turkish, it could be mug, for example. So we mean the same thing, we use different codes, right? So we're trying to learn the other codes. So language-wise, it's all the same, right? Because we mean the same. We may use different language codes. Then the problem lies whether or not we can decode these systems. And I've read somewhere else, languages are arbitrary systems, right? Because British use this pattern, Turkish use that pattern, right? And Arabic countries use from right to left. We write from left to right, Latin alphabet, etc. So these are systems, arbitrary systems, okay? We can always learn about this. We can always learn about how to use the correct version. In this sense, in your writing the task, what are you aiming your students achieve, right? Do you want them to express their opinions using the target language in the written form, or do you ask them to write accurate sentences? Research has shown, in literature I've come across with this, lower levels focus more on accuracy, A1, A2, whereas higher levels, right, starting from B1, they more focus on opinions, expressing their ideas. My suggestion, we should develop and improve both, right? I'm not saying that one is more important than the other. So in this sense, right, with the lower levels, we always focus on language systems, as you described here: structure, lexis, syntax, mechanics, etc., content, organization. But where is the message, right? Where is the opinion? What's the value of it, right? So students are trying to force themselves to come up with some ideas, but they have difficulty in putting this from mind to paper. My view, don't work on these language systems first, right? Work on their valued, invaluable ideas. Give feedback, but also slowly and gradually you can give some feedback and correct students' mistakes. So in an institution, right, I was working years ago, we had this policy, right? We have this timed writing, right, or process writing, right? And in this process writing, we decided the first one should focus only on language systems. So give feedback and correct students, structure with structure, lexis, and etc. But the next one, we would not care about past simple or lexis or wrong use or whatever. We just focus on the meaning. So we just focus on the meaning, right? So are you working, focusing on writing for accuracy, writing for fluency? Exams is a different story. In exams, right, we have holistic approach or analytic approaches, right, to correct and to mark. I guess, I just question, what's your aim? What's your policy?
Okay, that can be our starting point when we are evaluating students' papers then.
Okay, you talked about giving feedback for writing papers, Hocam. I have an additional question here. Are you in favor of using codes? I mean, do you understand what I mean? The codes that we normally use as instructors for spelling, SP for grammar, the GR, whatever it is. I mean, I don't remember right now, but since I don't like it, what about you?
Yeah, Hocam, thank you very much, because this is the continuation of the previous question, right? So error correction codes, right? We use different cultures materials, right? From other countries, we use English teaching materials. We also tailor our own materials, I know, right? And they all use these error correction codes, right? Giving symbols, for example, WW, wrong word, or grammar mistakes, GM, etc., and etc. So the question is, when we use it, right, whether or not students are intaking it, right? Is it something helpful, right, for the students? My answer is no, right? You know why? Because our education background and system is different from theirs. Starting from the early years of their education, they work on study skills, Hocam, right? when they see a message there, right, grammar mistakes, they just attempt to search for it, right, and understand what the mistake is. Whereas in our country, we are still struggling with note-taking skills, right, brainstorming, right, and talking about writing topic sentence, etc. and etc. Why? Because in their mother tongue, they haven't practiced this. They are not trained enough. So in this sense, students just produce something, their masterpieces, right, works of art, right, with the mistakes and errors, of course, with different ideas, and we start using this error correction codes, right? What is the exact difference between using red lines, right, underlining the incorrect sentences and giving them these using these codes? Nothing, right? My answer. But there are ways. For example, you can use these symbols, right? And at the end of the student's product, you can say 7 grammar mistakes, 7 GMs, right? 5 wrong word use, tense, etc. and etc. Whatever you use, because you can develop your own, right? It's always good to refer to the ones publicly released, most course books, and we can find error correction codes anywhere, but keep it simple, right? And safe. This is the KISS principle, you know? KISS principle suggests that keep it simple and safe. So why are you giving these, right, codes or whatever? So the paper becomes a sort of disaster, monster, right? Something like that. Now, accuracy focused, right? Lexis, spelling and grammar, done. 3, 5, 1. Fluency focused, right? Brilliant idea, right? Should be suggested. One interesting point, right, in the last paragraph should be supported with a supporting sentence or with an exemplifying sentence. So in this sense, I'm not with this coach. It doesn't work, hocam, right? Don't you think so?
I completely agree with you, hocam. I mean, and it's a very good idea to write down the number of mistakes that they make, like 5 grammar mistakes, 2 wrong word use. So you just let the students find their own mistakes in their masterpieces. I mean, you do not underline everything that they write, so it doesn't kill their what is that?
The flow of productivity, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't
productivity.
killed.
Very
I
good.
fully agree with you, hocam. Fully agree with you.
Great. Thank you very much, hocam. And here comes the last question. So Sena and I found the following quotation from Penny Ur.
Yeah.
She wrote that in 2002. And so to our teaching philosophy regarding error correction. To what extent would you agree with this quotation? Here comes the quotation.
Yeah.
Not all mistakes need to be corrected. The main aim of language learning is to receive and convey meaningful messages, and correction should be focused on mistakes that interfere with this aim, not on inaccuracies of usage.
Brilliant question, right? When we just think about our starting, right, at the very beginning of this conversation, I just stopped and asked you whether or not you noticed my errors or mistakes. And you said no, right? No, because it didn't, right, just stop the interfere, right, the communication. So we continue it, right? Who cares about this? This happened to me when I was working for Oxford University Press, right? I was writing to the Dean of the Education Faculty, right? An email. So Professor, what was the name? Macaro, right? So the Education Faculty. I was just working on a project with the teachers here in Turkey in EMI settings. And I wrote the email. I started a noun clause, right? What we do, XYZ, is something And I sent the email, right? And then I realized I forgot the main clause, right? The rest of the sentence conversation. I felt ashamed, right? As a professional, right? How you can forget, right? This, and I immediately write again. Correction, I said, right? In the subject section. Professor, I made this mistake and I forgot to write this, etc. and etc. Then I read and I realized that my message was clear without this section, right? And professor got back to me saying that, Turgut, don't worry about this. Who cares about the rest of the sentence? I received your message, he said. And this is real. This is from life. And this is me, right? So in this sense, yeah, receive and convey meaningful messages, right? This is the main of language learning. Definitely true. Why do we learn languages? To be able to interact with someone else using this language, either written or orally, right? So correction should be focused on mistakes that interfere with this aim. I fully agree, because we're just encouraging students to communicate, but with the fear of this making or doing an error, right? Mistakes or error, students are not producing, they're hiding themselves, right? So why bother? So of course you should know about the error types, the reason, the purpose, the aim of these errors. As long as you analyze and know them, you approach accordingly. But your students are using a very wrong word, which may cause speech acts, right? Difficulties, then please correct it, right? If not, I fully agree. I fully agree with Penny. How about you, Hocam?
I again totally agree with you, Hocam. You know, I mean, a language dies when the last native speaker of the language dies. I mean, so we should protect our own language as well. And as instructors of a second language, we should, know how to correct, when it is necessary, without, discouraging our students and without even discouraging our own children. So thank you very much for your valuable contribution. We are sure everybody will enjoy this interview. Hopefully. Thank you for your contribution to our podcast series.
Just final words. Maybe our audience, right, the listeners would know about this. There is this technique, format technique. 4 mats, right? Mat is the doormat, right? So in this format, there is 4 W and 1 H. So what is, what am I doing, what I am doing, right? And the other one, when, right? And why and how. So hopefully we talked and discussed about all these throughout this interview. And I would like to thank you very much for your inviting me and for making me a part of the furniture, right? Thank you very much. Right. It was great help.
Thank you so much, Hocam. It was a very insightful interview for us.
Hopefully. Thank you
very much, Hocam. Thank you again.